Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Ashok Gangadine, and this is Buddhist Thought in a Global Context. Great to see familiar faces around the room. Sorry I can't be with you in person. This is my 43rd year teaching, and this in fact is the first opening class I've had to be absent. I am in UCLA today, the 31st, with a group gathering of leaders called Evolutionary Leaders, quite relevant to Buddhist thought. And some of you could check in tonight. There's going to be a live 2-hour webcast show. And my assistant, Andrea, from upstairs, who's assisting me here in getting the logistics of this introduction opening class together. She'll put up on the board a reference to where you could tune in tonight for the streaming. There's live streaming of the 2-hour presentation of a call to conscious evolution, which in a way is the application of Buddha's thought and many of the wisdom teachers of the planet to address the crises of our time. So that's what I'm doing tonight at UCLA in the big hall. There should be 1,500 or more people in the audience, and this is going worldwide. And if you want to check the Evolutionary Leaders event, I think the website is called www.evolutionaryleaders.net/LA event. We'll put that on the board for you. You'll see what the event is tonight. But that's where I am. Sorry I couldn't be with you in person. And I'm so much looking forward to working with you in Buddhist thought. What I'd like to do in this opening session, because you know, there are many of you here, there's a long waiting list, and those of you who got into the top 40 positions might be questioning whether this is something you really want to do. And so what I think is best to do in this opening session, to hold you for about maybe an hour, it'll take to give you a sense of what is Buddhist thought. Why is it so challenging to really question everything we've done in our life to this point? We'll see why to really encounter Buddhist philosophy, Buddha's thought, in a primary way is not to just put it in the box and talk about it, but to go into an intensive laboratory of the mind, where you have to, so to encounter Buddha's thinking, you have to go through some kind of an awakening process. How is that possible? That's one of the challenges we face. So what I think is best to do in this opening class is to give you a sense of why this is such an exciting encounter to have with Buddhist thought in a global context. What does it mean to have a global context? And what does that mean, Buddhist thought in a global context? What are we going to read and why? And what is the class going to feel like? What are we going to do together, session after session? What are the course requirements? So I'll go over all of that in a very compressed way. But first and most important, it's going to be to give you a sense, a very poignant sense, of this amazing event on the planet when Buddha went through this great awakening that changed human history and the whole planetary situation. It's been a global event. And I'd like to give you a sense of that. So those of you who may be questioning whether you want to have this educational experience can exit. And what I'm asking you to do, my assistant Andrea, who's again upstairs, but we're with you, will pass around this pad. So for signing in, I know we have the lottery and we have the waiting list, I have it all here, but you need to check in. So on this pad, I'd like you to print your name so it's legible. One column would say check if you're in the top 40, the limit, or the waiting list. So my assistant will know when she goes over the list to confirm whether those in the top 40 positions are here or not. If you do not sign in today in the top 40, you'll be eliminated from that position. And in the waiting list, there will be an automatic sequencing from number 1 through and so on to the opening spot. So when I come back, this event is going for 3 days, but I'm not going to stay. I want to get back by Wednesday. I'm leaving them, the Evolutionary Leaders in Malibu Retreat near LA. I'm going to leave Wednesday around noon, even though they're going till Thursday, and fly back home, and I'll be here Wednesday night to be here for class, the next class on Thursday. Then I'll bring the list and go over the list to see who amongst the top 40 didn't show up and who on the waiting list has been moved up, and extremely important that you come to the second class. If you don't show up in the second class when I return, that's when it all gets confirmed. So if you're on the waiting list, I urge you to come. Sometimes you may be down 15, 20, 30. and it seems impossible, but somehow numbers shuffle, and before you know it, there you are, you could well be in. So I urge you to show up on Thursday until it all gets settled. So thanks for working with me on that. In a way, Buddhist philosophy, let me give you a sense of what is Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist thought in a global context, and why it really questions almost everything we've done perhaps in our life to this point educationally and as a human being. As you may know, before I talk about Buddhist context, I can say very quickly, in a way I can sum up the entire course in 4 basic sentences. They're called the Four Noble Truths. You've probably heard of them. When Buddha went through this great awakening and just saw more deeply into the question, why do humans suffer? What is the source of human suffering? I'll go and talk a little bit about his journey as a prince, and his father wanted him to take over the kingdom, but he was called by his heart to escape, so to speak, from the prison of the palace where his father was keeping him contained, so he wouldn't see the world or be pulled away. But he managed to get out of the walls and go out into the village area to see more about life outside of the luxury of the palace, where every desire was fulfilled, apparently. And he was shocked. Buddha was absolutely shocked when he saw the human condition. All kinds of suffering. The most visible one, disease, and aging and dying, and starvation, poverty. All of these, but human suffering of all kinds, he saw, and he was stunned and amazed. It blew him away. And he was a great physician. He wanted to heal. I mean, he was so disturbed that he said to his family, I'm leaving. I have to go out into the world. I cannot take over the kingdom. I'm going to go out and search and do research and be a student. I have a Fred Bryn Mawr student. And find the answer, why is there suffering in the human situation? And of course, being a Hindu prince, he had the best education, the best opportunities. He knew the Vedic teachings, the Vedas, Hindu wisdom. He therefore had acquaintance with yoga and all of the philosophy. So you'd wonder, what more did he need? Why did he have to go out and try to answer questions which were already so profoundly answered in the Buddhist tradition, in the Hindu tradition? Why didn't it answer the question as he saw it? But that'll be part of the query of our course. What drove Buddha into just giving up his life and his kingdom to go out as a philosopher, as a researcher, as an inquirer, as a scientist, to answer the question, what is the source of suffering? And can it be healed? And can I develop a teaching to not talk about it academically, but to actually make a difference to humans and to bring well-being on the planet? That was his quest. And when he did this, he went through all kinds of training to answer and see. And he did all the yogas and the austerities and the practices. He was like a martial artist going to all out, almost sometimes near death in terms of the asceticism and the practices. Great lab work for him to see, does he get the answer? And he felt he didn't. And after trying conscientiously for extended time, he finally began to say, I'm going to go off and solve this on my own. And as the legend goes, he went and sat under the Bodhi tree and sat in meditation and said, I will not get up until I've answered the question. And as, again, the legend goes, after 40 days and 40 nights of austerity, the lights went on, and he began to see deeply into the source of human suffering and the answer and the prescription. And those are the Four Noble Truths. And in a way, noble here, what does noble mean? Well, they're amazing, but in our present day, and since we're Buddhist thought in a global context, and global for us means what's going on the planet. It's not just Buddha. You've got Socrates, you've got Abraham and Moses and Jesus, and you've got so many great teachers, philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, Eastern thinkers, Lao Tzu, Confucius, all around the same time, around the time of Socrates and Lao Tzu in China, Abraham, Moses earlier, around 600 BC is when Buddha had this great awakening, just to give it a kind of a historical label. And if I put on the board for you the Four Noble Truths, I could say to you, okay, folks, that's it. You've got the course. I'll see you later. No need to take the course. You've got it. Because what are they? They're very simple. The first, and the point about noble, is maybe you look at them as global truths. Maybe there's scientific, diagnostic, and prescriptions for all humanity, whatever world you're in, whether you're Hindu or Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, Muslim, scientist, secular, whatever it may be. Buddha's truth, he saw himself as a profound scientist, a metaphysician, and healing at that level, of the soul level of the condition. So what are the Four Noble Truths, the global truths, potentially? Existence, everyday existence, is suffering. Imagine me writing this on the board. I want to stay with you, so I won't. And don't even try to write it down. I'm going to go very quickly for you, so that you will see this. We have a lot of ground to cover. So in about an hour, you'll get the whole sense of what the course is and what we're going to cover and requirements and so forth. So I want to keep tabs on that. The first noble truth is existence is suffering, meaning by that everyday life, the human situation. Naive, unphilosophical, pre-philosophical, existence is suffering. The second noble truth is it has a cause. Here's the science and the medical prescription. It has a cause, the suffering. It's clinging to the ego. People are living in the ego lens, the ego mind. Perhaps you never thought about it. Of course, we use the word ego in our everyday life. We all use it all year. That person's on an ego trip and so on. But Buddha's prescription, you will see how profound it is across the planet. If you're in the ego mind and believing in your identity, and you're processing yourself as an entity, I am me, and I've got my properties, my name, my credentials. I'm a professor, I'm a Haverford, I'm a male, I'm American. All of these stories that each of us carries. We are the bundle of our story. And if you believe in that story and that the entity and the subject that makes you, that's an ego entity. And Buddha saw that if you're going to ego in that way, if you're going to live as an ego and objectify the world and everything, not just you, but everything in your life, there's a chair, there's a table, there's a room, there are the lights, and so forth. And there's the other person, and we name it, and we name him and her, and so forth, right? When you live and use that mind operating process, that's ego mind, and that is the cause of the suffering. That's an amazing thing to say, because most of us live, it seems, in that kind of space. We live in a world in which we are, and I see myself as a special being, me. You know, I don't even think of myself as egoing, but I think of myself as a being different from all of you, and everything else, and not the table, and not the chair, not the floor. It's me, in this body, which is me and unique. Most of us live there. It's a very naive and common sense. But Buddha was alleging, in his second noble truth, that's the cause of the suffering of humans. And the third noble truth he saw is we don't have to use our minds. We don't have to ego. There's a different technology of consciousness. And if we could change the mind operating addiction, he saw it as an addiction. Ego is like any addicted person, an egoholic. You can be an egoholic, addicted to your egoing, addicted to your belief in your story, in your identity, in who you are, which you treasure so much, and all your life is built around that, and you see the world that way. Right? That's a kind of addiction of a mental pattern. And that mental pattern, we don't have to use it. That's the third noble truth. You can call it the axiom of choice. The choice is you can choose your mind operating process. So use a digital computer world, you know, when you change the operating system, right, that's driving your digital computer program. You know, if you think of the mind that way, the ego is a certain program that we got stuck on, and it's a kind of adolescent stage of our evolution and development, and we can develop beyond that, because if you get stuck there and think you're an entity and play that game, we're in trouble. We're all in trouble. And that's really what the suffering of humans would be. And perhaps it's just as much to the if Buddha is right, if we're still living in that world of ego mind and ego technology of consciousness, all of us across the planet, whether we're scientists and civic Americans or whatever we are, religious believing people, it doesn't matter. If you're egoing, you're creating an ego world of suffering. That's Buddha's point. So the third axiom, or the third noble truth, is we have a choice. We can change our minds. We can change our mindset. We can change our worldview. We can change our mind operating process. And so the fourth noble truth, the prescription for ending the suffering, given the scientific diagnostic that we cause it with our mind operating process, is that we can change it by putting into practice a 24/7, heads up, living in the world, The Eightfold Path of Mindful Living. So the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path, the 8 channels, the 8 major ways in your life, the kinds of things you do. You could classify them as 8, like right concentration, right understanding, right judgment, right action. When you're acting, you're using your mind or not. You could be doing it like robotically, right? So if right action, right intention, right understanding, right interpretation, and all of the different vectors of your mind, if you practice mindful living and you somehow break the ego barrier, you'll be liberated from that story and placed into a higher dimension, the Buddha field, the Buddha Dharma. The Dharma is the law. The Buddha Dharma, the Buddha saw, his scientific breakthrough was he saw into the unified field. The ego sphere, the ego life that we live in, is not the unified field. It cuts up and breaks up in fragments, and that, folks, is the source of the suffering. We're broken. We're fragmented. Our mind, our thoughts, our memory, we forgot who we are. We can't be integral. We're not using an integral calculus. So we're disintegral. And if you get disintegral, you're going to be suffering in all kinds of ways. It's going to show up in your inner life. You're going to be broken. You can't flourish. In your relationships with others, they'll be broken. You can't have love relationships and compassion, and dialogue is going to break down. With nature, you're not going to be flowing in a sacred space. So Buddha's prescription is enormous. He's saying it's possible to rehabilitate the mind. Rehabilitate, just of course you know the word. Rehab, to do rehab, habits. So rehab is changing the old habits, which are addiction, to ego, which is a vice. The ego vice has got us caught and causing our suffering. We can kick the habit. And if we kick the habit through practice, day and night, mindful, heads up, attentive, conscious act, we will cultivate an awakened mind, which is Buddha's awakening. He went into the unified field. He broke the ego barrier. And what is that unified field like? Well, he introduced, in a way, a whole new worldview. He says that's empty. When you wake up and you're in the zone, you're in the high space of Buddha, the Buddha field, all of that stuff that you saw in the ego lens, there's a table, there's a chair, there's this, it changes. You're going into a unified field. What is that like? Well, it took centuries to really bring out the full story. But that unified field, which physics wants to find, of course, after Einstein, all of the attempts to get to the unified field of nature of the universe is a unified field. How do you get a physics, a biology, a chemistry, and so forth to really process the unified field of reality? I'll talk about a global context in a moment, because I'll show in a moment that the whole planet, across all the wisdom traditions across the planet, we're trying to get to the unified field. So what Buddha did in terms of developing a strategy to get into the Buddha sphere, out of the ego sphere, and to break the ego barrier, what you find is all of that names and stuff and furniture of your life that clutters, including yourself, evaporates in a way and transforms into a flow of energy. And then you become an awakened being. Your body is much more energy. Like an athlete in the zone, when she's in the zone and has been running and just goes into that high space, you know what I'm talking about, you athletes and musicians and lovers, and when you just somehow get out of the ego, and it's not you doing it, but the activity is unfolding. You may be a musician and you're jazzing with your friends and improvising, and at first it's kind of dissonant and it's not really together, but somehow, if you're lucky, magic takes place and suddenly music is happening. It's flowing. You're connected in a deep way. Or you're on the soccer field and you're all broke, you're not coordinated, but in a magic moment, the entire team just clicks. And magic begins to happen on the field. You got out of the ego space into the unified field. You get into peak performance. So much of the planet is trying to live in peak performance, the Buddha field, in this language that we're using, but it has many different names in the different traditions of wisdom. What does it feel like to be in that high, unified, awakened consciousness where you're mindful and you're flowing with the energy of reality? Well, Buddha called that emptiness. The Hindu philosophy calls it Om, Brahman, the Atman. The language is there, all the yoga. Yoga is getting in the zone. So yoga is a science to break the ego barrier and go into the Om space. That's how the Hindu philosophy and wisdom teaches the liberation of the mind. And Buddha felt for some reason that was still trapping us, because if you're still in the ego lens, I'll talk about this in a moment, if you're still talking ego talk, you could just use the words Brahman and Om and Atman and Yoga and all of that with the ego mind, and you're blowing it. So Buddha's deep insight for humanity is it's very difficult to break the ego barrier. And you could spend your whole life thinking you got it and talking about Om or talking about Yahweh or talking about Christ or Allah, whatever it may be, or even the unified field of wisdom and knowledge or philosophy and wisdom. You could talk the talk, but if you're talking in the ego space, in the ego mind, you're blowing it according to Buddha. So Buddha's technology, his breakthrough was, how do you break the ego barrier really? And what happens to consciousness when you wake up into the Buddha sphere, into the Buddha field, and live in that zone? And what he saw in the unified field is that it's empty, so he called it shunyata, empty. Shunya in the Sanskrit means zero. Shunya means zero. Not one. Reality is not one. It's zero. It's zero of all the stuff in the ego box. When you break out of that box, you're in flow. And when you're there, you're not just seeing things and objects, and you're not one of them. You're in an energy flow. It doesn't mean that there isn't differences, and you're different from me, and you're different from the floor, and from the walls. You still have differences, but there's an energy flow of connectivity and harmony, and that's called Nirvana. You've heard of Nirvana. Nirvana means bliss. It means contentedness. It means happiness. It means release. It means freedom. So when you go into Nirvana and you wake up, then you're in the Buddha space, and then ethics flows. Why? Because everything is interconnected in shunyata, in the Buddha sphere. Everything is flowing. Everything is interconnected. So when you're breathing or moving, or your body and your mind, you're not mind versus body. It's all like unified martial arts flow. Life is a beautiful dance, a poetic dance. It's a song when you're in this field. Because everything is interconnected, you're not chopped off from others. You see that you're connected to the other, the I-thou. The others are not an it. You're not an object. They're not. The other person is not an it. Even your lover is not an object. She's an other, a presence. And so if you can go into the Buddha field, the other is in a way connected to you energetically, and you're experiencing that. And our great moral teachers got that. Buddha's ethics is compassion. And compassion you don't have in the ego. You can have pity and sympathy in the ego sense. But when you go into the Buddha's sense of awakened mind, you find and experience the deep interconnected flow. And when that happens, you see yourself in the other. And our moral teachers got that. It says never treat a person as an object. The Quaker honor code. You never treat another person as an object. The other person is a sacred presence, a thou. And when you can tend to yourself, is to tend to the other. If you violate the other, you violate yourself, because the calculus now is you're connected. We're all interconnected. And when you really experience that, not talk about it, but when you experience that, then you're in the honor code. Then you're in ethics. You're honoring one another. You're in the Buddha space. And that's called the dharma, is the word that in the Buddhist Sanskrit tradition for the law. You're flowing with the law of the universe. So physics and the universe and ethics are all together now. Because when you're flowing and surfing nature, you're ethicking, because you see the sacredness of everything around you, including yourself. And that's why, for example, to take an example, when Jesus was trying to teach his disciples the law of love, and he said, when I was in prison, you visited me, and then when I was hungry, you fed me. Well, the disciples were still in the ego voice and said, no, that can't be right. You're him, and they're them. How could that be? And when they questioned him, he said, when you tended the least of mine, you tended to me. Why? What's the science? Well, the I and the thou are so interconnected in the Christ field, and in the Buddha field, and in the Krishna field, and in the Socrates Logos field. If you could really get into that, as we'll talk about it in a moment, then if you can enter the unified field, then you awaken consciousness into ethics, and you get real. You become a full human. That's Buddha. That's Buddha's teaching. And so now you can all go, and you don't need to sign that yellow pad. That's a course. So what are we going to do? Well, here's the trick. Everything I just said to you could be taken down on a note paper. I could have written out on the board, but I didn't. Didn't want to turn my back on you. but I will now. You could write it on paper and take notes and say, oh, here are the Four Noble Truths. I got it. And that completely misses the point. And here's why. And think about what you've been doing all your life, you know, all with goodwill and parenting and early school and all the way through high school, and you're the best here. You're among the best in the nation in this room, and you're hyperverbal, you know, and you know how to read and you're highly literate. But just find a space as if this is where I've been taking my notes and seeing myself all my life. So here's the first noble truth: existence is suffering. It has a cause, the ego. We have a choice. And the fourth one, the Eightfold Path of correcting our minds and rehabbing. That's Buddha's teaching, right? You could write it down. But here's the problem. And now what I'm going to do is try and say, what do you mean Buddhist thought in a global context? And now I'm going to talk about that for a moment. And I'm, again, watchful of the time, because I really want to make sure we get down to the how the course is going to proceed and being together in the class and so forth. I'll sum this up in a moment. But if you look at the Hindu teaching, for example, it would see a difference between where we are, most of us. There is the self, you know. Here's the screen of consciousness, and here's where we are. That's a screen. Imagine it's a screen, and I'm processing myself here. All of my information is done here, right? Logicians call it, well, this is where we predicate. We join subjects and predicates to make information. So if you study logic, the science of thought, and says, what's going on in thought? This is thought space. This is where we make our thought, and our worldview is right here. Socrates is wise. Socrates is a man. He's Greek. I'm American. Haverford is a college on the main line. Bryn Mawr is all the information of our life. I am hungry. I'm thirsty. I'm cold. Right? I hate you. Whatever it is. Your mental states are all put in information. So this is where the scene is. But our great wisdom teachers across the planet were all seeing there's something wrong by being in this box. And that's all your life is. So if you go into the Chinese wisdom, it says the Tao that is named is not the Tao. That's the opening lines of Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, the great Chinese text, around the time of Buddha. He's trying to put the ultimate wisdom. And his noble truth is the Tao, the unified field. This is the unified field, the reality. And this is where most of us live, in the ego field. And the ego language, and information, and script. This is what we know. And this is really, in effect, what Buddha saw was the trouble. The first noble truth is existence is suffering. And that means this place, existence, life here is suffering. It's caused by clinging to this subject thinker who is doing all the thinking and processing. First noble, existence is suffering. It has a cause. We have a choice. We don't have to use this calculus. The third, and the fourth is we can rehabilitate our mind into the Buddha field. That's Buddha's teaching. Shunyata. I'm scribbling. This is shunyata. This is the place of suffering, samsara. This is the place of liberation, nirvana. And this is the bridge, the crossing, the Eightfold Path is how do I get my mind out of this box to break this barrier that separates me from everything, to get me into flow, into this infinite connected field of shunyata. That's Buddha's great. So the fourth noble truth is we've got to get out of this space and move into this space. With this language, the language of Buddha. There's a script here and a script here. And here's the trouble. This is why you can't just take the note down and go home and say, hey, Mom, Dad, I did Buddha's course in my first 15 minutes. I got the Four Noble Truths. Right? Get back to class. Because if you write the information here, you didn't get here. You didn't practice the pathways, the Eightfold Path of mindful living to get into the unified field. So that's a challenge of entering Buddha's philosophy. So just stay with me. Don't lose that thought, because I want to enlarge this picture, because it's not only the Tao that is named is not the Tao. That's a warning label to get into the Tao language. But the Hindu language, Om, when the great meditative thinkers of the Veda is knowledge, the Vedic tradition, the Hindu early tradition, for centuries and eons, the yogis were meditating on the ultimate force, the ultimate energy. They called it Om. And they knew that you couldn't put Om in the box. All of Hindu wisdom is that you've got to get out of the box. So if you read the Bhagavad Gita, which we do in the Hindu thought philosophy, some of you may have done this last semester, last fall when I did, I alternate between Hindu thought and Buddhist thought. So that the Hindu thought, if you read the Bhagavad Gita, the great text with Krishna, Lord Krishna, and Arjuna the warrior, you see that Krishna is the Om voice in the text, speaking to Arjuna, who is a warrior who is broken down in a war with his family, a war zone. And Krishna knows that the war is caused by his being in the ego space. So it introduces yoga. So if you want to get into the Om space, all of the Gita is teaching, you've got to get out of the box. And this is yoga. Yoga and many yogas, like the Eightfold Path, there are many yogas, eightfold yogas and more. And you know, you probably do some yoga, you know, in your neighborhood where you live. There are a lot of yoga studios around. And yoga is, believe it or not to focus on one point here in the ego, it's to break the ego barrier. It's to go into the Om space, to get into the zone, and that's the essence of yoga. So I'm just trying to show you, that's a global context now. It's that Chinese mind is trying to see wisdom is moving here. The Hindu wisdom is moving into the Om space. Buddha's strategy is going to the Shunyata space. If you go into the Judaic tradition and wisdom, the birth, you could actually see a very powerful moment that Yahweh, the infinite, when the infinite force, the ultimate primal force in the Judaic tradition, Yahweh is the infinite name, and you can't even write it. Don't write it, the warning. You're going to get, you know, the name that's written is not Yahweh. And the call of Yahweh, it always calls you out of this space into the higher awakened mind. So Yahweh, the law, the call, hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one, and love me with all your heart. So that what that means is if you put your ego agenda first, you're putting that second. So the ultimate call of Yahweh is put me first. Which means what? You better learn how to let go and surrender your Isaac, your identity, you. The bundle of you, you've got to let it go somehow. That's what yoga is all about. That's what Krishna is teaching Arjuna. To be a human, to cross into the human space, the sacred space of connectivity, whatever name you use, right? And then the Christ energy, you could see that the life of Christians, Christ is the Logos in the flesh, who's building a bridge into the Christ space. And the language there is, unless you die, you can't be born again, you've got to cross, all of that talking. So instead of samsara, you have sin. Sin is being cut off from God. It's being separated. So that to overcome sin into salvation, you've got to go back into connectivity. How do you do that? It's a major ultimate challenge to cross this zone. All the traditions knew that. You almost got to let go of this is not easy, right? To do that kind of research. I hope you get the picture. I can go on and on, Ya Allah, and I could see scientists trying to get into the unified field, whether it's past Einstein's equation to get with Hawking's into the grand unified field to understand how you get to the unified field, whereas non-locality and the butterfly effect and all of these weird-sounding things that you can't put in the box anymore. The language of physics has taken us, it's calling out for a language here. My years of work here at Haverford, I said this is my 43rd year, I'm a logician, and I've studied the laws of thought, and that's how when I arrived here in 1968, was trying to find, and I began to see there's a missing logic. There's a logic going on in this space. And Buddha was onto it, and the 2,500 years of evolution of Buddhist thought was the refining and trying to get that language and that missing script that the whole planet has been trying to get, right? I hope that gives you a sense of sort of global context. So I didn't even mention Plato or Aristotle or Socrates, the logos, the Greek logos. Amazing. The logos, the word logos in the Greek tradition is like the ultimate force also. It's speech, it's reason, it's mind, it's meaning. It's all of these very important words. We could say reason, rational light is logos. That's why the logos word is so important in all of our sciences, right? Psychology, philology. The logos word is like science because it takes you into. So all of Socrates seeing that humans are living in the cave in Plato's Republic, and the path of philosophy is to turn on the lights and get out of the cave and know thyself, who you really are, is the ultimate call of Socrates. And Socrates, of course, is going around the time of Buddha's awakening. So something's happening on the planet. There's a kind of awakening force, and the mind is dilating, and these geniuses are calling us to this higher consciousness and trying to give us strategies to get there. So what we'll do in the course is that we're not going to isolate Buddha's philosophy. We're going to constantly make references to Plato, Socrates, Descartes and his meditations. You'll say, my God, if you read Descartes' meditations, when he reached the I am, at that moment, when he saw he could doubt everything, he was crossing into the meditative space. So there is ordinary predicative thinking, ego thinking, and then there's meditative thinking. And to get into Buddha's space, you've got to somehow go into the laboratory of meditative intelligence and meditative thinking. It's a different kind of thinking. And often you have a sense in the culture here, as it's imported into America, into the West, that you're chanting Om, and you're sitting in silence, and your meditation is just silence, which isn't wrong, but it could be misleading. And what we'll try to see as we go into the depth of the text, of Buddha's text, and I'll talk about that in a moment, is that you find that the ordinary patterns of thinking that we're highly literate with, which is called in logic predication. Predication is joining pieces of information to make pictures of the world. Sun is shining, grass is green, the screen is on, and so forth. All information. That's predication. When you go into meditative thinking, it's a different technology. When you get into the zone and you're in the unified field. So what is that like? What is the script? What is the literacy? How do we get it? Is it important? Can I bypass it? How can this course speak to the question? If this is really where you become human, and this is the honor code really in its mature form, and this is science when you're really connected and interconnected, because that was what Buddha saw, that this is a cave, the mind is bound and you're in bondage to your story and your self-conception, and that you have to liberate the mind. And that's really the heart of crossing into the Buddha space. It is liberation of the mind, it's freedom. That's why it's called Nirvana. And Nirvana really means happiness. It means flourishing. It means well-being. It means health. So that Buddha's prescription as a metaphysician, a physician of the being, was to give us a prescription to flourish. And this is the place of suffering. This is a place of flourishing. So now let's just think about what can we do in this class together in studying Buddhist philosophy. We're going to be starting with the text, the great text, the early Buddhist teaching, called the Dhammapada. You'll all get this text. And I'd like you to read the first chapter for next meeting. On Thursday when we come, we're going to get right into this. I'll rehearse some of this, of course, when I get back next session. But I'd like you to start getting familiar with the Dhammapada. And the word Dhammapada, I mean, it's a more colloquial. Dhamma is Dharma, this, and Pada is path. And the pathway into Dharma is this book. What is the pathway into the Dharma space, the Buddha space? If you open this book, as I hope you'll do soon, to the first verse, just to give you a sampler, because what I want to give you a sense of is what is the educational challenge for us as rigorous top students and faculty minds, trying to be honest and deep in the text in its terms and getting it rigorously, right? We want to be analytically rigorous thinkers and scholars and students here in this class, and to honor the teaching and to honor it in its terms and not impose. If I read all my Buddhist philosophy here, obviously I missed it all. Because Buddha's point is you can't process Buddha's teaching in this space, which is a problem. So the question of this course of Buddha's teaching is, how do I open space as a student to really hear Buddha's voice coming from the Buddha space so that I don't egoize it and neutralize it? If you open the text to chapter 1, I'd like you to read chapter 1 and 2 for next time. But you have to really think deeply about this. It captures all the wisdom. The opening verse, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. If a person speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows. As a wheel follows the foot of the ox that draws the wagon. It's almost like a great axiom of the human situation. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. That's a bombshell. It's all that we are, our being. What we are is our thinking. And therefore, if we ego think, we're going to have an ego being. And if we can Buddha think, we'll have a different life. And it starts off from there. If you get to the second chapter, and that's just to get to the second chapter, we'll have to work our way through. That's what we're going to do in the class. Read them and work on them together to really get them in this laboratory. In the second chapter, it starts out with a startling opening again. Earnestness is the path of immortality. Thoughtlessness is the path of death. Earnestness is being heads up. But like the quarterback on the field, you've got to be heads up in the moment. You've got to be there like the martial artist in the moment. Right? That's earnestness, being attentive. And earnestness is immortality. Thoughtlessness, namely ego thinking, is thoughtless. It's unthinking. There are two levels of thinking. This kind of thinking is not thinking. So mindless living is a kind of death. So this is no fooling around. Buddha's teaching is saying if you're in the ego way of thinking, you're almost brain dead. In a sense, you're not living. You're not really touching reality. You're not sane. Sanity is flowing with reality. So the prescription of Buddha is a technology to transform the mind process and habits, to cultivate new habits. That's what virtue is. A virtuoso is outstanding in her habits. A vice and virtue. So when you have vice, that's not ethics. You can't be ethics here. Virtue is moral excellence. So Dhammapada is the path to moral awakening and excellence. And we're going to spend the first 6 weeks of the semester steadily working out together in this laboratory. So now let me just collect some of these thoughts and wrap this up, because you should be getting the idea of what the challenge is going to be. And having taught in this room for over 40 years, when I came back from India in 1972, so it's been really 40 years now, almost 39, 40 years, when I started to teach Buddhist philosophy, when I encountered it in India. I was born in Trinidad, grew up in Jamaica, and came to New York as a boy, and didn't have contact with India. And then I went, and after coming to Haverford College in 68, in 71 to 72, I took leave and went for the first time to India, and I was just blown away by an encounter with the Hindu thought and the Buddhist thought. And I came back, and I felt I have to find a way to make peace and integrate this into my journey as a logician, to find the logic, which was my main quest, and the laws of being as an ontologist. That's my special focus. And I realized after coming back and started, I was teaching it as I was trained, this is all I knew. And it took me 1 or 2 sessions to realize something is wrong in this classroom. I'm teaching it, I'm violating the teaching of Buddha by putting it in the space that we all know. I've said I had to open up a space where the Buddha was speaking from. And so I had to come to the realization that I had to find a more creative way in this room to be a rigorous philosopher and get our students to go into the text in the most deep way of rigor, analytical rigor and clarity, of the highest academic standards, right? And really get the text. So the classroom became a laboratory. It's an intensive lab. It's strange to think that philosophy can be a laboratory. We have labs over the science building in biology and chemistry and so forth. But no, in philosophy, to go into the space of the teaching, it's a mind-intensive lab, because it's all in terms of the habits of the mind. So since it's rehabilitation work to enter Buddha's teaching, to break the ego barrier, the only way authentically to do it is to enter the lab together where we work out in the highest way. And when we leave this classroom, I say to our students, here, I'm going to give you the longest assignment you ever gotten. In a way, it's strange to say this, but 24/7, your assignment is to be heads up, to be mindful, watch your consciousness. When you're on the soccer field, be attentive, be mindful. When you're in the dining center, when you're eating, and you're in the process of eating, how are you sitting? How are you breathing? When you're walking across campus, when you're on the cell phone talking to your mom and dad or your lover, whatever you're doing in the dorm, right? Are you heads up? So the assignment is be heads up and practice, that's the rehab, practice Buddha mindfulness, put the teaching, it's a manual, it's an ethics honor code manual of mindfulness. Ethics is mindfulness. And so the ethics of Buddha's teaching is to practice mindfulness in your life. So when you're doing economics and you leave this class and you go to another class, be heads up. Watch the heart of economics. Is it economics going on here? Could there be economics in the Buddha space? What would Buddha's economics be? Any subject, physics, because physicists are earnestly trying to get into the unified field and get a language for non-locality. Non-locality is the higher causal structure. This is linear thinking. So one cause, one effect, one cause, one effect. When you get here, it's all intercausal. That's why you get the butterfly effect in the unified field. Buddha got that in the unified field. What is going on with the butterfly's wings in the rainforest of Brazil is connected with the typhoon or the weather here. Why? Because this is a web of interconnectivity. Buddha's word for that, pratitya samutpada, co-arising. All things are energetically co-arising, co-causal, interactive across the universe. And therefore what you do is connected as a butterfly effect with the entire field, and the entire field is non-local. This is local. This is global. This is non-local. Everything is interconnected. What would life be like if we could get into that space? That's lab work, the highest lab work, to put this to the test. So asking, if you're going to be in this course, I think it's vital you make a commitment to a contract, a verbal contract to us now, that you're going to show up for every class. If you have to for somehow miss a class, give me a notice ahead of time if you can. Don't take it, because I circulate every time the check-in pad. And what I ask students to do ritually, when you check in, check in. Don't check in here. Don't say, oh yeah, I'm in the room. You know, I showed up for class. I don't want you to show up for the class, you know, in a kind of, my body's in the seat. I want you to check in the sense that as a ritual act, that I'm going to be mindful. For this next hour and a half of the class, I'm going to be present, I'm going to be mindful, I'm going to dialogue, I'm going to work out in the lab. I'm checking into the lab. That's vital. Because you can't do this course just catching up on the reading. It's not a matter of, here's a reading list, read the books, and give me back the information. It's not that kind of education or learning. It's much more demanding. It's much of a higher level. You've got to integrate this into your mind and test it out. And you know, the point is that, and as a critical thinker, you have to say, is this for real, or what is this about anyway? And part of your journey into the course is to assess it. You might want to say at the end when you write your final project that I don't think Buddha had it. I think he missed the boat. I think this whole thing is and here's why. And I want to invite you to really do it in that kind of a laboratory test way, right? Or if you find that with every week, with every day, you're getting more mindful, you're soccer playing, you're running in nature, is getting more in the zone, you're getting into peak performance, right? Your lover life is getting more awesome because you're not treating your lover as an object. For example, your conversations with your friends are getting deeper dialogue, and you're really connecting, and you're watching yourself mindfully in everything you do, in your other courses, in your physics, in your math, in your pre-med sequence, in your meetings with fellow classmates about political matters on campus, whatever it is, right? If you find the practicing mindfulness is upgrading the quality of your life, this is really what the research laboratory work is about. And our journey in the class, just to give you a kind of poignant sense of what are the requirements, what are we going to do together. Because of the nature of the research in this lab course around the texts, we're going to form small teams. Many of you who worked with me before know that I don't give blue book exams, because giving an exam in a blue book is not the way to test this kind of intelligence. You've got to somehow perform. It's a performative test. So it's not a test, but it's a performance. So I have upstairs, my office is right upstairs here in guest 203 above us. And I have small group intensive sessions to work out together at the midterm time. Before the midterm, I ask you to write a short paper. By then, we'll be well along in the text, and I may say, and we have other texts, of course, you'll see from the reading list. I'll talk about that next time more. But the first text is the Dhammapada. This is going to be our introduction manual to learn and get oriented to this very challenging alternative form of meditative intelligence, Buddha thinking, into the Buddha space. And so as we move into the 4th week or 5th week, I'll give you an assignment to write 3 pages on, you're now using your voice to give an interpretation of one of the later chapters or one of the other selections. So you'll have a chance to test it out and put it in writing. And I'll collect that before around fall break. Right after fall break, we will have our midterm conference, or review, intensive. I call it a midterm conference, because it's not a written test, but it's more challenging. It's an oral, small group performance to think out intensively where you are, to assess it. So I'll give you questions, about a page or 2 of questions from what we would have covered by then, to have you test yourself. And I'll ask you to write it out as almost like a test blue book before you come in, and hand that in. I don't grade that. But I found it's very useful to kind of get ready for that conversation, which is the midterm conference. Short paper, about 3 pages before midterms, the midterm conference. We form groups, but I found, and I'm going to do this very early in the 2nd week of class, we'll form our midterm groups very early, groups of 5, because I'm going to see it as working groups throughout the semester. So for example, when we have, if we have about 40 students, 5 in every group, you do the math, how many groups you have? 8? 7 5s are 35, 8 groups, about eight groups here, and imagine 8 groups, and you're clustering the way you want to, or just by chance. We'll go up and have you sign up for your midterm times. We'll kind of say, this is going to be your midterm time, but this is a group, and that's your working group. So maybe in the 3rd week, I'll say, group number 1, come on up and take chapter 2, lead us in it. Try to work out together as a group in front of the class. So we're going to move around, move the energy. It's not just going to be here talking all the time. It's going to be you getting out of the seats, coming together in the dorm, teaming up. So find people in the class that you love to work with. If there are people, if you don't know people, well, when you sign up, you'll get to know them. But we're going to form working groups, and those workout groups are going to help lead the conversation whenever the assignments are unfolding. So after the midterm conference, hopefully you've reached a level where you're much more comfortable with this form of thinking and intelligence and getting oriented to Buddha's speech and thought patterns. And then we're going to do something that's amazing. We're going to make a switch in the course to Nagarjuna. We have the novel by Hermann Hesse, Siddhartha. Many of you have seen that, some of you have read it. I'd like you to read that because it's the journey in a novel form by this great novelist, Hermann Hesse. Siddhartha, the name for Buddha, Gautama, but Siddhartha is, again, another name for the Buddha, and that's the name of his text. That'll be kind of a reading to get you into another form of this. But Nagarjuna, one of the great geniuses of the planet, it's really unbelievable what he did, because after 600 years, he comes about 150 AD, Nagarjuna. You may never have heard the name, but when you encounter his philosophy, you're going to be wowed. It's at the highest level of analytical brilliance and genius the planet has seen. And that's going to take us to a very high space of learning the language, of breaking this barrier and crossing into shunyata. That's Nagarjuna. I'll develop that next time when I get back. I want to kind of let you go in a moment after I wrap this up, because I see that the hour is almost out. I don't want to keep you too long. I hope by now you have been carefully printing your name on the pad. Please make sure that it goes back to Andrea upstairs, my assistant, so that we have that pad, so I can cross-check your names that you checked in this time, and do come next time. But just let me finish that sense of the main requirements of the course. Again, you've got to show up for every class, and you're going to be performing in class with your group. And so it's a performative class, and therefore attendance is important. And attendance in the deep sense of really being here, right? Because that's what really makes the energy of this laboratory work together. We're reading this text, and you are trying to, together, in mutual trust, to build an energy field that can somehow get this energy opened up by reading the text together. That's meditative dialogue. So the class is an intensive dialogue, laboratory dialogue, to struggle with the text. And each of you, trust your colleagues, say what you think it means. In other words, say, no, here's what I think. And you'll see it's going to unfold. And I'll be your coach to help you get deeper and deeper into the meaning, session after session. So when we come to Nagarjuna, it's going to really challenge you. I mean, that's where it separates off. You're climbing in the Himalayas. It begins to get very demanding at that point to read Nagarjuna. I'll talk about that next time when I come back. And so the second part of the course is going deep by deep, chapter by chapter through Nagarjuna. and we're going to supplement it with some of the other readings, the history of Buddhist thought, and Shantideva, a great other Shantideva, the Bodhisattva's way of life. I'll talk about that next time. But those are the main readings. And after the midterms, I don't give you a numerical grade. I give you a lot of feedback because I'm coaching you. And the finale of the class, and this is really what you need to know, is I ask you to write a research paper, a kind of lab reflection of how are you putting this experiment of going into Buddha's world and Buddha's thinking together, over time. How do you put this together? There are many ways to write a final paper. You can do a classic analytical paper comparing Buddha's teaching to something else, or as a physicist you might want to do something related to how does this help us with physics, the Buddha's philosophy and the quest for the unified field in physics, or psychology, or psychotherapy, or economics, whatever the field may be, sports. Many athletes in this room, I'm sure, and about being in the zone. What does it mean to be in the zone for an athlete? Can you write a research paper, a lab from human experience? How do you put this into practice in your life? Have you ever had that breakthrough yourself? How do you make sense of it? So there are many, many ways, but I'm trying to give you a sense that the nature of the educational encounter with Buddhist thought is calling us to go into this laboratory of testing out Buddha's teaching all the way, experientially, to see if it makes sense and to somehow convey that in your final project, 15 to 20 pages, due at the end of the exam period, so there's no take-home question, and that's going to be, and I'll work with you individually in the last 2-3 weeks to get your topic clarified and brought together. And that's going to be the kind of requirements. So again, if you're going to be checking that list and going to be with us, please make a commitment to show up for class. It's absolutely important. I circulate it every class, and I notice if you're here. If I see you're fading away and you're missing classes, you didn't check in with me, you didn't have a family emergency or were sick or something like that, I'm going to just take it that you're fading and you just have lost interest, or you don't care, or you're withdrawing. Because I really want everyone to flourish in this class and perform at the highest level. I want everyone to do the highest level of work. And so I hope this helps you to get a sense of whether you want to check in and come join this project this semester. I'd love to work with you. It should be a joy to teach and study this work. I see this laboratory as a place of bliss, a place of nirvana. It should be joyous. Philosophy, as you know, is a love of Sophia. Wisdom is Sophia, the feminist energy, the feminine energy, the goddess Sophia. And philosophia is lover of wisdom, lover of Sophia. So that it's a love affair in Guest 101. Don't tell anyone. That's what philosophy is. And so it should be delightful, it should be fun, it should be playful. Not heavy duty, cramming information in, but a levity of putting this into practice. Just to give you a sense of what my approach is. So I look forward to working with you, and I'll get back on Wednesday night. I'll be here on the next meeting. Do turn in the yellow pad, and I'll pick up on these themes next time. And any questions you have, I'll have handouts next time, and we know who's going to be in the class. Once we get the list straight and the waiting list clear, I'll have a kind of a course summary and so forth. So all of this will be very clear to you. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.